All right, so the Jaguars account earlier today tweeted out who is on your Jaguars Mount Rushmore. And I was just talking about this with Dempsey and with Ogier. And I think you can go about this, Taylor, a few different ways.
Mm-hmm.
You can put owners on your Mount Rushmore. You can put coaches. You can put players only. Everyone's going to have a different way that they're going to go about it. And as I told them, I think the one player who's not on it yet, but in order for this franchise to get where it needs to go, is Trevor Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
In 5 years, when we have this conversation, he has to be on that as far as the top 4 Jaguars to ever wear the black and teal ever. But he's not there yet.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that there's a few on this roster that I think that some people may put a Josh Allen on there right now. He's not on mine yet, but I, in my notes, wrote, in 5 to 7 years, I'm predicting that maybe some of these ones that are on my list from the older times, which is my whole list pretty much, will be replaced because they will start to have this number more recency. And you love the originals, and we want to talk about them forever, and you're almost going to at that point want to be like, well, we have 10 to 15 names we can put on our Mount Rushmore, which you probably don't right now that truly deserve to be on there. And eventually I think that the way that the organization is right now, we will have that, and it'll be more of the problem of like, how do we even decide 4?
Yeah, I saw somebody's comment to the Jags was, we're going to need a bigger mountain. Yeah. And I was like, that's a good way to be, or a good place to be in as far as a franchise goes. So, all right, I'm going to guess that you and I both have Tony Boselli on our list.
I do have Tony Boselli, yes.
Okay. And of course, he is the only Jaguars of now to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, was enshrined 2 years ago when a lot of us went up to Canton. That was a whole lot of fun. And he better not be the last Jaguar to be enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Tom Coughlin should be in the near future. Fred Taylor should be. We'd like Jimmy Smith to get there eventually. But yeah, I figured we both had Tony. From here, you mentioned that you have a lot of the 90s guys. Mm-hmm. So from here, I'm going to guess you also have Fred Taylor.
Yes. And in my eyes, number one, if you're having Tony Boselli, a Hall of Famer, has to be on your Mount Rushmore. Fred Taylor, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, has to be on your Mount Rushmore. And I also always go back to the fact of what running backs were asked to do during that time, too. It was such a physical position, and he played it at just such an elite level that it's hard. I put him at 1 on mine, so I did like a 1 to 4, and Fred was 1 on mine, just because I feel like when you talk about it, he played over 10 years here, and 7 of those he had 1,000 or more rushing yards each of those seasons, and like I said, in a more physical time of playing that position. So he's probably, if someone asked me my favorite Jaguar of all time, it would be Fred Taylor, so he's the top of my list for that one.
Which is funny, too, when we had him on
also, I got to
wear
wear Taylor jerseys when I was little, so that's
yeah, which is also really fun. When we had him on earlier this week, and I told him the only jersey I've ever owned, and still to this day, the only one I have, is a Fred Taylor jersey. And of course, for me, it's twofold. Mm-hmm. 1, he was a great running back at the University of Florida, where I went to school. And 2, of course, a Jaguar as well, and a fantastic Jaguar, a legend. But at the end of the day, you probably never will replace, as far as the best running back of all time in Jaguars history, that person or that position will never be replaced because of the way that the NFL has moved away from running as the primary part of the game. And so I think Fred Taylor will always be the best running back. And certainly Maurice Jones-Drew, honorable mention for second best running back. And I think he'll always be the second best running back here as well. All right. So you gave us your number 1, which is Freddie T. Was Tony Boselli number 2?
It was actually 3 for me.
Okay. Who's number 2?
I went back and forth between this because, like I said, he's a Hall of Famer, so I think he should be higher. But another player, and I know there's side stuff with this one, but to me, Jimmy Smith, when you have a guy who's currently holds all of the receiving records in Jaguars history, hopefully that's something that's also starting to change here in Jacksonville now with a franchise quarterback and some of these weapons they've added. But when you have seasons with 116 catches and 112 catches, he was just one of those guys that was so much fun to watch. And I know there was some side stuff with it, but when you're just talking about the football player and that Mount Rushmore side of being one of the top in your organization, I feel like you're not talking about the Jags without Jimmy.
So both of us have Tony Boselli, the left tackle, Fred Taylor, the running back, Jimmy Smith as well, the wide receiver. I have him too because Thunder and Lightning was such a big part, and I don't quite have room for Keenan McCardell, but certainly that tandem of receivers was one of the best in the league at the time, and the Jaguars are still yearning for receivers like them, and especially that burner like Jimmy. And it was fun a few years ago getting to watch him go into the Ring of Honor for the Jags and be on the field, watching him and the emotion that was flowing through him. And like you said, just the productivity that he had. The Jags.
I mean, it was almost like he was going to get 1,000 yards.
Easy.
You just didn't even question it.
And that was before 17 games.
Yes.
Before the league shifted to be more of a passing offense and certainly a passing league. I think Jimmy Smith is one of those guys that if he was on the team now, he'd be their best receiver.
Yeah.
And we want that to be Brian Thomas Jr., certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly Christian Kirk is still here, and now you've got Gabe Davis. I understand that in totality, this wide receiving core is going to be expected to do a lot in addition to Evan Ingram as well. But none of the individual parts of that, I feel like, can compare to Jimmy Smith.
Yeah. And like you said, just imagine having him on a team like this, a team that's throwing the ball 600 times a season, and it's that very heavy mindset of a passing vertical offense and what we've been asking. That'd be so much fun to have Jimmy on this roster.
It certainly would be. All right, so then I'm going to guess that in the end,
probably have the next
we all have the same, or you two of us have the exact same 4 as yours, Mark Brunell.
No, actually,
okay,
mine's
right.
MJD.
Okay, I can understand both.
Yeah.
Go first.
Oh, yeah. I think that, again, when we talk about the era of running backs, and maybe this is me giving a love to the position group too, because we are fading so much away from it. So I don't think we're going to be able to talk about running backs the way that we did in the 90s and early 2000s, and obviously pre that. But I mean, MJD, to me, you have a whole slogan of him because of how just powerful he was when he was on the football field and he was running the ball. And he's one of those guys, too, where he holds the rushing record touchdown still. And most people would probably think it's Fred, but it's MJD because you would always find him in the end zone. And so those are moments. And I think for me, so many of moments that I remember from Jags games when I was really when I just came back and I was really getting into football again, he was the guy scoring most of the touchdowns at the time. So it is maybe just in my head all the time of having that. But I just think that even you saw him as kick returner sometimes, which is really fun. I think he has like over 2,000 kick return yards too. And so I just love that aspect of MJD. But there were some, you mentioned McCardle, Mathis, like some of those names I was kind of like on the fence of adding, and obviously Brunell too.
Yeah, Rasheed Mathis is, because he's a local product and he was so good as far as especially getting interceptions, is a guy that I saw him on some people's lists. You mentioned the all-time scoring leaders. So Josh Scobie still leads as far as the points for the team because, of course, the kicker, followed by Mike Hollis, and then it's MJD. But MJD, as far as touchdowns, to your point, 81 touchdowns, Fred Taylor 70. It doesn't seem like it should be like that, but there were so many other weapons on the team, like we talked about with Jimmy and Keenan. Yeah. When Fred was here, when MJD was here.
Years, too, MJ did it.
Yeah, when MJD was here, not nearly as many. One other thing about Jimmy Smith, I think the Jags thought that they had his replacement when they drafted Justin Blackmon. I think they thought this is going to be a guy that can put up similar numbers. And obviously, we know it didn't work. I have Mark Brunell for obvious reasons because I think he's the best quarterback to date in the Jaguars franchise history. But like I said earlier, Trevor Lawrence has to replace him. Now, yes, Blake Bortles holds the most passing yards in a season. He holds the most, or maybe Trevor surpassed him recently, but he certainly has the most touchdowns in one season with the 35. But those were a lot of garbage touchdowns, garbage time touchdowns. So, yeah, Mark Brunell, if you are a Jaguars fan who maybe is younger and doesn't remember these teams, go Google or YouTube Mark Brunell highlights, and he was mobile before mobile, I feel like, was even cool in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's hard. He was one of the ones obviously on the cusp of mine too, and I think that when I was looking at this list and I started thinking about that 5 to 7 year time frame of who do I take off when it's time to add Trevor or Josh. And even there were some names like a Calais where I know some people want to add that, but to me I couldn't just because it was 2 years. You know, I need a little bit of more time as a Jaguar to be able to put you on the Mount Rushmore list. But Calais was fantastic, a player, a human, everything you want in that. Like I wish he could have been a longer, bigger part of the organization. And so some of the people that I feel like were on my cusp were along those lines. And I saw a lot of people with Bortles, and to me, that no way he's on my
I just assumed that was a little bit of a joke. Now, I will say, if I wasn't doing players only for this, then I would have the Weavers, Wayne and Dolores Weaver, and I would have Tom Coughlin as well. You also could now argue, since the news of the last few days with the stadium renovation getting approved by the city council, that Shad Khan belongs on there. So you almost need a separate Mount Rushmore for
like organizationally. And
exactly.
Players.
The people who brought the team here or are keeping the team here. Tom Coughlin, certainly the first coach when it was an expansion franchise, and the AFC Championship game that he brought the team to. Tom Coughlin then played another role later. Some would say not as good of a role. I think the reason the Jaguars in 2017 were successful, it was in part because of Tom Coughlin.
Yeah.
Was he a little too old school at times as far as the rules, wanting players here that violated the CBA, saying publicly that he expected players here when it was voluntary? Sure. But I think, and also as an aside, as a human, Tom Coughlin's absolutely on the Hall of Fame with everything that he's done for his family and the Tom Coughlin J Fund as well. But I think you could go in a whole nother direction there. And
for sure.
Let's hope that Doug Peterson is also a guy that in 5 to 7 years we discuss as well.
We could also put Doug Marrone for getting us Trevor Lawrence.
Oh, yeah, I did see someone mention Frank Gore, and I was like, yes, he does belong in the Mount Rushmore if Trevor is who we think he is and brings us at least one Super Bowl victory. Yeah, I like that. That's funny. So, yeah, if you want to submit us yours, you can do that on the text line designed by Lifetime Enclosures, 641-1010.